It's time for our roundtable discussion. Here with us today, MSNBC political analyst Karen Finney, Michael Fletcher, national economics correspondent for the Washington Post, Deborah Simmons, senior correspondent for the Washington Times, and new to our roundtable, Pennsylvania State Senator Vincent Hughes. Folks, welcome to the show. All right, Vincent, nice pocket square, too.
Thank you, Trying to keep up.
Yes, I got you. I'm sure your wife, Shirley Ralph, is saying represent in those Delta colors. All right, then, absolutely. All right, lots of news this week dealing with the polls. Who's up, who's down, tightening race. First of all, I don't really care about the overall numbers because I think, frankly, they are irrelevant. I believe what matters, those key 12 states. When you look at Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New Hampshire, Iowa, North Carolina, also Florida, and then we go out west to Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, and then also I think you throw in Wisconsin as well. I think that's 12. And to me, those are the key states. The overall is irrelevant.
You know what I think is relevant, though? A couple things. Honest and trustworthiness, shares my values, and likability, because those numbers kind of tell you how voters feel. And consistently, they like President Obama, they trust President Obama, they think he understands their issues. Not surprisingly, they're not so sure they like Romney. They're not so sure they trust him. In the New York Times poll, it was 6 in 10 people think he'll tell you what you want to hear, right? So point being that some of these themes have been consistent throughout, which means that's where both sides are going to try to exploit what they might perceive as the openings. That's why Romney's saying Obama, nice guy, but in over his head because he knows people like him.
Two things, women and millennials. One of the polls said there's only a 7-point gap between Obama and Romney when it comes to young voters. That, to me, is critical because of the role they played in 2008, but also the huge gap between Obama and Romney when it comes to women. That is going to be a huge issue in those critical states.
I mean, absolutely the case. I think that's where Romney's going to have to try to play to his strengths, try to talk about sort of other issues to kind of win women back in a strange way, like things like the economy. That's why you hear them talking so much about the number of women who've not gotten jobs, in the recovery, and they're trying to make this case that somehow Obama is bad for women, and making the economy bad for women. And that's the kind of thing they have to do.
You know what? Neither party does right by women as far as I'm concerned. The Democratic Party keeps women tethered to welfare and a whole bunch of social service policies that we really need to get out of on the one hand. And the right-wing Republican, the women that are over on their camp are like trying to play the strong, independent, my husband is a good thing. I think the two women to watch, there are only two women to watch between now and September. One is Michelle Obama, and the other one is Ann Romney. Those are the only women we need to pay attention to right now because they represent what will be in the White House, and that's what matters.
The problem with that is that the Republican Party, and I'm operating with a governor in Pennsylvania, Corbett, one of those swing states, who famously said women should just close their eyes when it comes to having an ultrasound.
I don't believe that women are going to walk into the polls and say, I'm going to vote for this person based upon contraception, based upon ultrasounds. But I do believe that there is a narrative where they say, now, let me look at a number of issues and ask myself the question, based upon what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, who is going to be the person that we'll speak to where I am?
I take a different view, and from what I've heard from women, and it started, I think we have to remember this concept of the war on women over a year ago when we started seeing these measures at the state level. It's not just what the measures say. It's when a state legislator says, if we have an exception for rape, women will use that as a loophole. What does that tell you about the integrity of that individual? That's what you think of women. When you hear members of Congress talking about redefining rape, or you talk about, some of these other measures where it's not just the measure themselves, it's not just the lack of access to contraception itself, it's do you really think that low of me as a human being? I mean, women run corporations in this country. We have women secretaries of state, and yet we're still having conversations about the competence of women to make these kinds of decisions. I think that's where women are feeling threatened, and I think they would much rather be talking about the economy. But if you tell me that what I thought was a settled issue is still up for grabs, I got to worry about that. I would much rather worry about access to capital for my business and how I'm going to send my kids to college and those other issues. But I think a lot of women are feeling this on a much more fundamental level in terms of, wait, I thought that was settled.
But you say, now feeling it. We've always felt that. Women were the ones who fought to get a sexual assault changed to rape for our benefit. So it wasn't, even the fact that it was considered a violent crime, because rape was not considered a violent crime. But what I'm saying is, the question, we ask the exact same questions that men ask before they hit the polls. And that is, what do you want individually and personally, regardless of what your husband might be saying, or your brothers, or even the president, or the potential candidates. And it's also, who do you identify with? You can easily closely identify with a woman like Ann Romney, rich or not, who said, I'm staying home and taking care of my 5 children, as easily as you can Michelle Obama, who says, I'm going to work and taking care of my 2 children.
I want to raise this point because this is one of the issues that we've seen when you begin to talk about the issue of poverty in this country and who does it most affect, women and children. Senator Hughes in your state, Pat Toomey, the GOP senator from Pennsylvania, said that, look, he doesn't think most Americans need a helping hand. He said this week, quote, there's a small segment of our society that absolutely needs a great deal of help because they can't really take care of themselves. Now, the latest census says there are nearly 50 million Americans in poverty. When we had Congressman Jim Clyburn on here talking about the Clyburn Amendment that identified these counties that he felt 10% of the government funds should go to, where they have a 20% poverty rate for 30 years, 2/3 of those nearly 500 counties were Republican counties. And so when you hear Republicans try to make the argument, some of the brokest counties in America and some of the brokest states with the weakest education system, with the highest rates of poverty, are red states.
Absolutely. What you have, Roland, and there's a thing that's happening all across the country, especially prevalent in Pennsylvania, these smaller cities, the Scrantons, the Chesters, the Wilkes-Barres, the Eries, the Allentowns, they're all crumbling. The educational systems are crumbling. The cities are crumbling because there's no economic activity going on in those communities. And so now we're in a situation where, how do we rebuild those communities? How do we bring those communities back? The Republicans are turning away from that. It's happening in a swing state in Pennsylvania with Corbett, not paying any attention to that, and these communities are falling apart. We've got to pay attention.
Michael,
the problem you see, Roland, I think, is that, and you make a good point about where these poor districts are. I think the poorest district, one of the poorest districts in this country is in Kentucky. Hal Rogers is one of the most conservative congressmen.
24 of those counties are in Kentucky alone.
Right, but look how people vote, and that's the argument that President Obama and the Democrats are going to have to make. They're going to have to make sort of an argument that, what is in your interest? Look at what's in your interest in a more clear-eyed way. Often people really go for these arguments of cutting government spending, and somehow that's going to enhance their well-being and trickle down to them. And you have to change that.
I want you to hold that thought. I want to pick it up when we come back on the other side of this break.